In this pencast, we're going to be learning how to graph various types of functions. So the first part of this problem says, draw the graph of y equals x to the fourth minus x squared. So we know that this is what we call a quartic function. And we know that quartic functions generally look something like this. So we know that's going to be the general shape of our function. So now let's pick some x and y values to plug in. Let's pick -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Alright, so -2 to the fourth minus -2 squared is equal to 12. So on down the line, so we have -1, that's equal to 0. All of these are actually equal to 0, and that one's equal to 12. Alright, so this doesn't tell us a whole lot, except for we have points at -1, 0, 0, 0, and 1, 0. We need to know what's going on in between those points. So what I would recommend doing is picking two more points that are in between them, like -1/2 and 1/2. So if you plug those values in for the function in your calculator, you're going to get -0.1875 for both of those. So now you can see that it's negative. The function's negative between -1 and 0 and between 0 and 1. So we know that the function comes down from 12 up here, which is higher than our graph goes, but we can go like this. That's going to be negative between those two and negative between these two. So we know the graph looks something like that. This next function is what we call an inverse function. So we know that the general form is y equals a over x minus h plus k. Alright, so then we know that there's a vertical asymptote, T-O-T-E, okay, at x equals h, and a horizontal asymptote at y equals k. So h in our equation is 2, and k is 0. So we have x equals 2 and y equals 0 as our asymptotes. Alright, so now let's pick some points to plug in. So since we know that 2 is going to be our vertical asymptote, let's pick points on either side of 2. So let's pick -2, 0, and 1 that are below 2, and then 3, 4, and 6 that are above 2. Alright, so if we plug in -2 to this function, we get 7 over -4, or -7 fourths. When we plug in 0, we get -7 halves. When we plug in 1, we get -7. When we plug in 3, we get +7. 4, 7 over 2, and 6, 7 over 4. Alright, so let's go ahead and graph this starting with -2, -7 over 4. So that's going to be right about here. And then we have 0, -7 over 2, which is going to be about 3.5, so it's right here. And then 1, -7. So that'll be right there. Alright, so now we need to look at the end behaviors. So on the left, we know that it's going to be approaching 0, so it's going to get closer and closer and closer to 0 without ever touching it. So it's going to look like this. So then we got to connect all of our points here. And then we also know that we have a vertical asymptote at -2. So let's just, or at +2, sorry. Let's just draw a dotted line there. So as our graph continues, it's going to approach +2, but it's never going to hit it. So that's the left side of our graph. So now let's graph the right side. So we have 3, 7. Alright, and then we have 4, 7 over 2. So that's about here. And 6, 7 over 4. About there. Alright. So now we know again, on the left side we're going to be approaching that asymptote, that vertical asymptote. And on the right side we're going to be approaching the x-axis, which is our horizontal asymptote. So that is what that inverse graph looks like. Alright, so this last function is a square root function. So we know one thing about square roots, and that is that the number under the square root can never be negative. So we can see that we can't plot any points to the left of -2 because those are going to give us a negative value under the square root, which will make our equation undefined. So we know that x has to be greater than or equal to -2. So when we're making our table, let's just start with -2 and go up. 0, 2, and then 7. And the reason I'm picking these values is so that we'll get we won't get a fraction under the square root. So -2 plus 2 is 0. The square root of 0 is obviously 0. So then we have the square root of 2, and then we have the square root of 4, which is 2, and we have the square root of 9, which is 3. Alright, so to plot that, we go to the left 2, and then we plot -2, 0, 0, square root of 2, 2, 2, and 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, sorry, 7, 3, 1, 2, 3. Alright. So, this is what our graph is going to look like for that last function.